An ink smeared beneath my thumb, the chair I'd saved for them sat beside the window, facing a table crowded with tiny folded onesies, paper flowers, and a chocolate cake beginning to lean in the July heat. My phone buzzed again. "We're staying another day. Your sister needs us more. She's real family." I stared at the message until the words stopped looking like words. Around me, people pretended not to notice. My neighbor adjusted the ribbons on a gift bag. My husband's aunt complimented the lemonade. Someone laughed too loudly in the kitchen. Nobody mentioned the 2 empty chairs. That hurt more than if they had. My mother had always described me as the easy one. She said it with pride, as though independence bloomed naturally instead of growing from being overlooked. My younger sister, Kara, was different. Every disappointment in her life became a family emergency. A missed rent payment, a breakup, a flat tire. Somehow my parents were always on the next flight, the next highway, the next rescue. When I bought my first house, they mailed a card. When Kara adopted a puppy, they drove 8 hours to help pick a name. I kept telling myself it wasn't a competition. The baby shower finally ended with more leftovers than guests. Before leaving, I closed the guest book and tucked a pressed lavender stem between its pages. I'd picked it from my garden that morning because it smelled like calm. By evening, it smelled like dust. My husband loaded gifts into the car without saying much. Silence had become one of his gentlest forms of kindness. Halfway home, my phone chimed. Attempted withdrawal, $2,400 declined. At first, I assumed fraud. Then I noticed which account. Years ago, when I was 20, my mother had helped me open it. I'd forgotten she still had emergency authorization attached to it. She'd never used it, not that I knew of, until now. The timing hollowed something inside me, not anger, mission. I parked outside the bank instead of driving home. My keys rested in my lap. Hanging from the ring was a tiny brass house key that no longer opened anything. My mother had given it to me when I left for college. "So, you'll always have a way home," she'd said. Funny how objects outlive promises. Inside the bank, the account manager listened carefully while I explained the situation. She didn't ask whether my mother meet well. She didn't suggest waiting a few days. She simply nodded. "We can remove every authorized user today." The keyboard clicked, cards disappeared, permissions vanished, digital access ended. Each confirmation sounded smaller than I'd imagined, yet heavier. When I walked back outside, my phone was already ringing. "Mom." I watched it vibrate across the passenger seat, then Anne, and again. By the time I reached home, there were 19 missed calls. The voicemails arrived in stages: confusion, annoyance, pleading, then outrage. "You embarrassed me at the bank." I almost laughed. Embarrassment had finally found the right address. 2 days passed before I answered. "You locked me out," she said immediately. "I protected my account. You knew I needed that money. I knew you didn't ask." A long pause settled between us. Came the sentence I'd spent 30 years waiting to hear, though not in the way I'd imagined. "We just assumed you'd understand." Of course they had. Understanding had always been my job. I asked one question. "Did you even plan to come to the shower?" Silence. Not defensive, not angry, just empty. Finally, she sighed. I was having a hard week. I looked across the nurseries where afternoon light spilled over a rocking chair we'd found at a thrift store. My husband was tightening the last screw on the crib without listening to my conversation or pretending not to. My child was having their first celebration, I said quietly. She didn't answer. Weeks later, Kara called. I almost ignored it. "I didn't know about the bank," she said. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I didn't ask them to take your money. I believe you. And I told them they should have gone to your shower." That surprised me enough to sit down. She wasn't apologizing for everything, only for her part. Sometimes that is all another person truly owns. Our conversation lasted 12 minutes. It solved almost nothing. Yet, when it ended, I realized resentment had painted her larger than life. She wasn't the architect of my loneliness. She had simply lived inside a system that rewarded needing more. Months later, our son arrived just before dawn. The hospital room smelled of warm blankets and antiseptic. Rain traced slow lines down the window. Visitors came in small waves. Neighbors, friends, my husband's family, people who had never once claimed blood made them important. When we finally brought him home, unpacked the baby shower gifts that had stayed untouched for weeks. At the bottom of the box lay the guest book. Only half the pages contained signatures. I almost bought a new one. Instead, I placed it on a shelf in the nursery. Over time, visitors wrote little notes beside the blank spaces. His pediatrician left a tiny smiley face after his first healthy checkup. My elderly neighbor wrote, "Thank you for letting me become an honorary grandmother." My husband added a single sentence months later while I was asleep. Family begins wherever love keeps showing up. I closed the book and slid the dried lavender stem back inside. It crumbled slightly between my fingers, not ruined, just changed. My parents still call occasionally. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't. The accounts remain solely in my name. The boundaries remain quietly intact. People often think consequences arrive with shouting or revenge. Mine arrived through paperwork, unanswered calls, and one ordinary afternoon when I finally understood that love without limits had become permission. My son will grow up learning something different. A key should only open doors you're invited to walk through.